This is Surfing Through Cinema. I'm your host, Hawaii Harry. Today I'm making another change to the formatting of how this podcast will be working. I haven't been too happy with how Genres Week has been going, and I want to be able to have a bigger scope and more freedom when it comes to reviewing films. And so from now on, the episodes will premiere as follows. First Tuesday of the month is still Streaming Through Cinema Week. The second Tuesday of the month, instead of it being Genres Week, will now be called Classic Hollywood Week. And in this, I will review any film from the classical Hollywood era from the 1890s all the way to the 1960s. These will be a random pick of films I've either seen before or I've never seen. And the third Tuesday will still be Star Wars Week, and the fourth week will still be Disney Week. And thank you guys for your understanding and your patience. I hope now with this new week it'll make things feel more natural and less restrictive. And so, for the first episode of Classic Hollywood Week, I want to discuss a film that I have watched recently for two reasons. One, I had bought it on VHS a few months back, and I still hadn't seen it ever in my entire life. And a lot of film fans, collect films. I collect VHS tapes, and so this is one of them. And second, for a while, this film won't be showing on any streaming service because they'll be adding a disclaimer to it, so I wanted to see it before that happened. This movie has caused a lot of debate over the years and has caused a lot of controversy, but it's also had a lot of technical achievements that haven't been seen really since. And so I'm of course talking about Victor Fleming's classic film, Gone with the Wind. Okay, so some technical details about Gone with the Wind. Adjusted for inflation, Gone with the Wind is placed on top of highest grossing films of all time. And compared to a $2.5 million budget, it grossed $300 million worldwide. And so, if you adjust that to nowadays, it would have made about $3.5 billion. That's insanity. There's no film ever since that has even come close to making that amount of money. So, it's still number one. That's just insanity. Hattie McDaniel, who played Mammy, she was the first African-American person to ever win an Academy Award. And that was back at the 1940 Academy Awards. That's a crazy achievement that not many people know about. There's controversy with it because the NAACP and a couple other organizations claimed that she was kind of being an Uncle Tom for working on the film. But she responded with, "I'd rather be paid $700 a week to play a maid than be paid $7 a week to be an actual one." So I think that just shows a lot of integrity and a lot of insight she had with being the first African American person to win an Academy Award. And crazy enough though, a lot of the actors didn't like their characters, especially Clark Gable, who played Rhett Butler. He absolutely hated his dialogue, he hated his interaction with the characters. He felt the movie was kind of childish and more directed towards women than towards men, because he was used to being in westerns and action-packed films, and this film is definitely not that. So now we'll get into the plot of it. A young manipulative woman named Scarlett O'Hara and a charismatic rebellious man named Rhett Butler, they have an on and off again relationship over the course of the Civil War and the Reconstruction era. Now Scarlett O'Hara grew up in a cotton plantation in Tara, Georgia, and over the course of her life she's infatuated with a man named Ashley, but he's always out of her reach. He's always, he got married to his cousin, Melanie Hamilton, who's played by Olivia de Havilland, who's famous for the Robin Hood movies. It's always like she's trying to go after Ashley, but feelings are either never reciprocated or he's just always out of arm's reach of her. And, eventually the Civil War breaks out and she decides to marry her Ashley's brother Charles just for the sake of being close to that family still. But he ends up dying during the Civil War. Just over time, just all these crazy events happen, and each time a major event in her life happens, such as when Ashley first goes to war, or such as after the war, deciding she's never going to go hungry again, she walks out to a field, and it's almost like she's praying or praising or something, and then in the background there's a sunset. And it's kind of like saying her old life is ending and it's going to start anew again. But eventually we'll see, as time goes by, she just keeps going back into her old habits, keeps trying to get into a relationship with Ashley, and eventually it just leads to her downfall. Eventually she does get married to Rhett Butler, but their relationship is very toxic. Neither of them really show affection toward the other. They have a daughter, and it seems like Rhett only really likes her. But the daughter eventually passes away, and finally Rhett he's just absolutely done with her, and he's just completely cold and completely turned away from her now. Ashley's wife, Melanie, she's on her deathbed, and she calls in Scarlett and tells her to take care of Ashley. And then Scarlett and Ashley have a moment, and she realizes that her love that she had for him was non-existent, because Ashley's just totally heartbroken at the death of his wife, and Scarlett realizes she'd been chasing a golden goose all these years, and so she decides to go back and try to make it up with Rhett Butler, but he's just finally had enough of her. And unlike the other times where there's a major change in her life, this time it's not clear if the sun is setting or not, so the audience doesn't know if she really is doing the right thing or not, and we don't know if her future is clear or not. So it's very poetic and very nice way to end the film. Alright, well that's the plot. I'm going to go on a break real quick, but first here's a message from our sponsor.
This podcast is brought to you by Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Here's how. It's totally free. There are tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast from your computer and even your cell phone. But that's not all. Anchor distributes your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many, many more. You could even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor is everything you need to make a complete podcast all in one small place. So go on and download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today.
Okay, so we're back from our break. So now I'm going to get into some critical reviews and my personal views about Gone with the Wind. At the time of the release of Gone with the Wind, many critics thought that the second half of the movie was overdramatic and kind of filled too much with drama and kind of compared it to soap opera, so not taking it too seriously. That is also due because Scarlett had all those many marriages, and you can never really connect and like her. Others have said, well, that's kind of the point. Like, none of the characters in the movie are really ones you like. On the surface, you like some of these characters, but the more and more you get to know them, you realize that they're all kind of just terrible people. The only really good person in the whole movie is Melanie Hamilton, and tragically, she's one of the ones who dies. So, all the innocent, all the good people are the ones who die, but then all the bad people are the ones who keep living. So, it's kind of poetic, Not everything goes the way you think it would. Despite all those things, Rotten Tomatoes gives it a 91%, and then the audience score of it is 93%. So, lots of people adore this film and really enjoy it. AFI even ranked it number 4 on their list of 100 greatest films of all time back in 1998. So it goes to show a lot of people really do like Gone with the Wind. But just over the years, it's kind of been, looked down on for being overtly racist or of it being too controversial. And I think the issue isn't necessarily with the... You have to really think of it in the context of when the stories take place. This was during the Civil War. This was during a very controversial time to begin with. So it makes sense we're going to have controversial characters. That's just the way it is. Like, if you watch The Godfather, those are also terrible people. They're gangsters. Like, they kill people for no particular reason. Sometimes because of their race. Like, history has had a lot of terrible people, and I think it's kind of foolish to kind of try and hide those things away. I think it's better to showcase it so we learn to never do it again and learn to have an example of what not to do. And there's no real hero, no real villain in this movie. Everyone's kind of good and kind of bad, just kind of like how people really are. The Union, yes, they were the good guys of the Civil War, but there's some bad people in the Union armies. And then vice versa, there's some good people in the Southern armies. So it kind of shows that at the end of the day, there's good and bad in all sides and everybody. And I think that's something people need to recognize when they're watching the film. And so now we'll get into my personal views of Gone with the Wind. I personally don't believe the film needs a disclaimer. I mean, it's about the Civil War, and, slavery and all that was terrible, yes. But at the same time, I think we need to leave education and all that to the educators, such as teachers and parents. If people really do have a problem with it, they don't have to watch it. Like, no one's obligating anyone to watch it. Yes, it's a classic, and yes, a lot of people say it's one of the greatest movies of all time, but that doesn't mean you have to watch it. And the next point I kind of touched about it earlier. I really liked how each time a major event was happening in Scarlett's life, she was always near a sunset, and it was kind of breezy. So, like, her old life was going with the wind. And I love the symbolism of that and the imagery of that. Like I said, at the end of it, it was being foggy, so you had no idea if it really was her path or not. So I thought that was a very good use of imagery and symbolism within the movie. And you don't see a whole lot of that now. It kind of seems like that type of thing would be a classical Hollywood trope. Oh yeah, and then my last point is, despite the 4-hour length of the movie, you were really engaged with the characters and the storyline. So it went by a lot faster than that. I do agree, I think the first act is better, but then again, life isn't always the way we plan on it being, so the second act kind of seemed more realistic. The first act of the movie seemed like the classic, love story that you would see in Hollywood, and then the last act seemed like what the realistic aspects of war and of love can be. So I think it's more realistic than you would typically see during this time, and I think that's very monumental. That's something we shouldn't forget and hide away. Well, those are my thoughts about Gone with the Wind, and thank you guys again for being patient about my uploading and changing of things. My hope now is, with this new Classic Hollywood Week, I'll feel more open and free to share different movies that I've seen or haven't seen and feel a lot better about it. Because I'll be honest, with the Genres Week, I kind of felt restricted because I picked films within each of those genres, but for the sake of fulfilling the 4 numbers, instead of picking ones I actually wanted to talk about. So now I'm hoping that from now on, I'll have movies that I actually want to talk about during this week. But like I said, thanks again for being patient. Next time I'll be discussing the next film for Star Wars Week. This is a film about a beloved character within the Star Wars universe, and he ran the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs. He's best friends with a Wookiee, and he indeed shot first. I'm of course talking about Solo, A Star Wars Story. Alright, well until next time, this has been Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry. Take care.
Thank you for listening to Surfing Through Cinema. Make sure to check us out on Facebook at Surfing Through Cinema with Hawaii Harry and on Instagram with Surfing Through Cinema. We also have a website, www.anchor.fm/surfingthroughcinema, where you can learn more details on upcoming episodes and on past episodes.